The Eloquence of the Scribes, a memoir on the sources and resources of African literature by Aikwe Arma. Copyright 2006, Aikwe Arma. Introduction. This is not a survey of African literature. Neither is it an autobiography. It is a report on the intersection of one writer's consciousness with the matriarchal tradition it belongs to and assumes. It begins with the recognition of a basic drive that is this writer's psyche often overrides other needs, a desire to understand self, society, and the universe. It was that urge to knowledge that first drew me to narrative art. For though I could feel the pull of the other paths to understanding narrative art, from my earliest recollections, seemed to possess a wonderful explanatory promise. The accident of birth brought me into casual routine contact with a narrative corpus that gave me an early awareness of myself as a member of a supra-tribal, supranational society, the Akan, endowed with memories of a home in other parts of the African continent and a connection to other groups here. The Akan corpus is part of a tradition of verbal art that fell on hard times, first with the Arab assault and then with the European takeover of Africa. In a comatose state, it still had a faint heartbeat that grew strongest during customary festivals, naming ceremonies, marriages, and funeral rituals, mainly through the work of musicians and spokespersons of the kind known as Akyame. Leaving home to go to school within the colonial context invariably meant moving away from such home realities to enter a formally organized world of temporal power in which African realities were actively minimized or negated, while the official dogma of Europe as the exclusive source of significant value was triumphantly projected. A high intelligence quotient in that power frame meant an ability to acknowledge as true the assumed universality of Europe, along with its corollary, the nullity of Africa. Once children entered that formal school world, it was simply impossible, if they wanted to succeed, for them to nurture aspirations of a vocation at once literary and African. For within the system, it was an axiom that literature was a European activity and that Africa had no literature. The school system offered Africans an invitation into the European universe, so our teachers tried to equip us to discuss snow and European flowers and cities as if we lived among them, while remaining silent about the traditions that we left behind at home. The European invitation was, in essence, a welcome into psychic and mental alienation, a deliberate and often quite charitable enticement into an officially supported form of lunacy. Literature was present as a humanist discipline, but so skewed, tribal, and racist that the European concept of humanism, that when in the sixth form we studied the English author Jane Austen's Mansfield Park, we were invited to discuss and focus exclusively on a handful of English characters, and to ignore the lives of the thousands of African captives whose unpaid labor in Antigua made the European lives at the center of that book possible. In genuine literary terms, both human communities, the European and the African, belonged in our field of vision. The decision to exclude one and to privilege the other was political, not literary. I turned away from literature that was entirely silent about Africa when I was an undergraduate. While I was getting immersed in English literature, I felt profoundly ignorant about matters that seemed increasingly important to me: the passage of societies from poverty to wealth, and the reasons behind the ordering of the world I was growing to live and work in. I saw that if I continued to study literature as taught in the academy, I was unlikely to reach an intelligent understanding of the world. It was at this time that an event happened that brought my need to understand the world order into excruciatingly sharp focus. Lumumba, the most attractive political figure in Africa at the time, a man whose charisma depended wholly on his ability to analyze African realities rationally and to state his vision with courage and hope for the future, was assassinated on orders from the secret services of the USA, Britain, Belgium, and France. The murder was applauded in Europe and America, as was the installation of Lumumba's place at the head of the Congo state of a string of venal mediocrities faithful to European interest. The politician who got the heaviest in European and American support was the thief, Mobutu. To get a clearer understanding of an increasingly bewildering world, I switched my undergraduate major to a new multidisciplinary major, social studies, within which my chosen focus was the process of industrialization. As my understanding of global society and global social realities grew, my interest in literature as a consumer activity faded, though I sought out and took creative writing courses. The more I studied the social sciences, the clearer it seemed that sooner or later I would move from academic study into social action. I did not see such a step as an abandonment of creativity. I do not define creativity exclusively in terms of working with images and words. I saw the promise of working to change unjust social structures into equitable, egalitarian ones as beautifully creative. To me, the prospect of giving up writing to participate in revolutionary work did not mean sacrifice. It meant creative fulfillment. I had my attempt to work as a social revolutionary, part of a group creating a just, egalitarian society, succeeded. I might never have written a single book, for I consider a just society more beautiful than any work of art. Left free, after failure, to contemplate life-work choices other than egalitarian revolution, I decided to spend the remainder of my life working at a vocation I still found congenial, one which was indeed my first love, writing. Before I could work as a professional writer, however, I had to solve a preliminary problem. The best professional work, especially in the arts, grows out of the nurturing base of a tradition. Yet here was I, an African intellectual, reconciled to being a writer after formal education that, as far as literature was concerned, had been organized as an initiation into European fundamentalism. From what tradition would I fetch my literary aspiration? Intellectually, the colonial teaching of the literature rode on a doctrine as bluntly irrational as the worst religious fundamentalist creeds. The doctrine might be summed up in a jocular formula: there is no literature but European literature, and Shakespeare is its prophet. I knew no African talent would find room for growth within the confines of such a literary creed. Using research techniques acquired while I was growing beyond the doctrine, I looked for suppressed but still retrievable traces of an African tradition that I knew from infancy was there, even if European intellectual fundamentalist scholars had decreed that it could not exist. I did not look for traces of the work of ancient African writers and artists in order to imitate them. The griots and scribes of old Africa were a conservative lot who saw the status quo of their times as their own. I live in an entirely different world. Like the griots and scribes of feudal and ancient Africa, I respect the heritage of intellectual effort and professional discipline. Unlike them, however, I would like to use whatever skills I have, not for the maintenance of the existing world order, but for the creation of a better one. I've therefore opted to link the intellectual content of a retrieved tradition with the technical demands of professional writing in a cooperative publishing experiment. This book describes the information, much of it from ancient sources, that pointed the way to that option.